to block 1 of the spring mini series. I have my beverage of choice and all my supplies. I am ready to go. Let's get started. The colorway that I'm doing for this project is the pink colorway. I do have a blue colorway, and you can get kits in both. You can get kits as fat quarters and heat and bond, or you can get it completely cut out like this one is right here. And so our pink ones are pre-order and our blue ones are ready to go with the completely cut laser cut kits. They are also coming with all their threads that you'll need for the project, or you could simply use a monofilament thread that is a clear thread. We also include the needles because with this thread, this is Wonderful thread, and they like a Microtex needle. So we've included that into our kit. In the last video, we had completely done our pre-cutting and starching. So we've starched everything and cut everything, or cut our background squares to where we need. And now we're ready to do our first square. The last video talked about all the supplies and fabrics that you'll need, and we included a pattern in that video so that you would know exactly what you needed if you're getting it out of your scrap supply. This video is going to be for the pink colorway. And so I have already picked out my colors, and what I advise is for you to have a dark color and then 2 like medium colors, a light color, and then with your greens, you're gonna want a dark color and a light color, and you're gonna want a yellow for that pop for the flowers and the pot, and it just gives a nice little pop all the way around it, okay? So you also want a nice background color. So check out the previous video. That will give you all the instructions that you need to get us started. When you get your colors ready to go, these 3 are pretty easy to remember, okay? But I have struggled in both the blue and in the pink colorway to keep my colors straight. Make a color sheet that says that this is your dark, this is your medium, this is your peach, this is your light, this is your dark green, this is your light green, this is, that way you have a reference to go back to when you're reading your pattern. This is what the pattern will look like when you run it off. So it has everything that you'll need. These instructions are usually the same. Watch out, I will let you know when they change. But for the most part, everything's the same. You're going to have a dark pink color for this one. I used a medium pink color for this one. I have 3 yellow and 3 medium pink. So I'll tell you how many to cut out and what color I used. I have that in both the blue and in the pink when you go to the website. Okay. First thing we're going to do is we're going to trace out everything onto our heat and bond fusible. If you already have your pre-cut laser kit, then you don't have to do this step. You can skip on. I use a pencil, and I like heat and bond. That's my favorite stabilizer at this time. I'm trying some other stabilizers, but this one is working the best for this project. And so heat and bond has a paper side and it has a glue fusible side. I want to trace on the paper side. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out some of it. I have pulled out a yard of interfacing of this fusible, and I will just keep going until I am done with my project, and I'll just keep it with all my stuff. Okay, so I like to rough cut. Sometimes when I'm tracing and stuff, I will line everything right up to the edge. But before, I want to be able to rough cut and do a clear cut on my fabric. So I am going to rough cut. Therefore, I want to make sure I have some space here when I'm tracing out my design. And I just use a pencil and go around my designs. I'm tracing on the outside of my lines. That way, if I need to trim anything in the end, I have a little bit of fabric, or if I mess up my cutting, sometimes I get a little quick, then I can go back and fix that up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and trace everything out. I'm leaving a good 1/4 of an inch here so that I can rough cut all these out. rough cut all of these out. By rough cutting, I mean I'm leaving just a little bit. I mean, I'm not doing anything that's precise here. I'm just going to get my pieces out. And then I like to keep the colors that are the same, kind of to the same. So I messed that up with my yellow, but I'm going to keep these. I don't even need to cut them separately. There we go. Have my yellow right there. So these three are going to be the same color. These three are the same color, so they're going to go together. I am going to trim off just a little bit more here. And I'm going to cut out these yellows right here. So I'm leaving about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch all the way around each of my pieces. This particular block only calls for 3 fabrics. So I've laid those fabrics out and placed my pieces down on that fabric. I've placed them, of course, to the wrong size of the fabric. I say of course, but I understand that we all mess up sometimes. So make sure you're going to the wrong side of your fabric. And then you're going to just iron that in place with a nice hot iron, just like that. I used my paper scissors to cut out that last step. And now I can pull out my fabric scissors. So I rough cut the interfacing, but now I am going to cut directly on that line with my fabric scissors. And that gives me a nice clean edge. It helps prevent any fraying of the fabric. And it is just so much easier to cut than trying to cut just the fabric. Starting right up here with the medium pink strips. And the first thing I did was I laid them out just to make sure they are all fitting on there and that I cut them correctly, and they look really good. So I'm going to go ahead. Now the only thing that I did notice was that I kind of think they're a little bit fat. So I am going to go ahead and trim them down just a little bit. And it's your project. You can do whatever you want. If you feel like they're a little too fat or they're a little too, you can do whatever you want. And so to take off the backing, I just sort of scrunch up an edge, and you want to make sure that you're leaving that shiny backing on. So once I get this off, I want to make sure that that shiny backing is staying on the fabric. If it doesn't, simply iron it again. So I'm going to stick this guy, oops, he's upside down. Stick him right up here. All right, I'm going to thin you down just a little bit. You can see I have a tendency to cut on the outside of the line as well as draw on the outside of the line. So that definitely makes a difference. But again, I'd rather see what it looks like and decide what I'm doing and then go for it. Trim you down just a little bit. I have not taken the backing off the big guy. I'm going to go ahead and get everybody on there and make sure I like it. And then I can go ahead and, oops, I didn't trim him down any, so let me trim him down a bit. There we go. And so now that I have those guys in place and I like how they look, I'm going to go ahead and iron them down. And that's the nice thing about not having taken the backing off of the big, is that I can just keep going and putting them on there. Okay, so I have a little bit hanging off over here and a little bit not covered over here. That's okay. That's going to be covered by your stitching when you do that. All right, I'm going to finish this, getting my guys on here. And so I'm just taking off and making sure that I have that shiny stuff on the back. So you can see how I turned my circles so that they were the best. I'm never good at cutting out circles on my own. And so, but I put them so that they're in their best light. It'll be just fine. And I'm gonna go ahead and iron those down. I'm gonna let that cool for just a second. I don't wanna cut or move or anything when it's still warm because things could shift. The glue could not be settled yet and that type of thing. I want to center this guy onto the block. So the first thing I'm going to do is take, this is my pre-treated block that's 5.5 inches. I'm going to fold this guy in half, just like that. I'm not going to iron or anything to get a real crease, but I do want to kind of know where that center is and open it up. And then I've got 2 pins here. So I'm going to stick a pin here and that's on my fold. So I'm going to stick a pin here on my fold. So I know where my center is. That's all I want to know. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this guy. I'm going to fold him in half. I don't want to fold too hard. I just want to know where my center is. And then I can see where my center is and I can place him on there. Okay. He is not going to go all the way to the end. You want to have a little bit of space there and a little bit of space here. Not too much. We are going to make sure that that seam, when we put all our blocks together, goes in there. But I didn't want so much bulk. So he is going to have a little bit of room at the top and the bottom. All right, so now that I've got the centers lined up, I can bring in my iron. And now he's perfectly centered on the block. And I'm going to let it cool and we can start stitching. I am using different colored threads for my project. If you want to use a monofilament that has, it's nice and clear and will get the job done very, very quickly, I totally get it. I'm going to use the raspberry for the outside dark pink. I'm using a light pink for the little hearts and the stems here. And then I'm using the yellow for the little balls. And then I'm using a neutral gray thread that's going to be in my bobbin. And so I've already filled up my bobbin and I'm ready to go. I like to start in the center. I like to start in the center with the smaller pieces. Makes me feel like everything goes much quicker for some reason because I'm nice and fresh and ready to go. Let's talk about the different types of stitches that you could use. I personally prefer the blanket stitch right here. It is much more forgiving for me than any of the other stitches. This stitch right here is simply a straight stitch, and I have a tendency to go off of my fabric, or over here, I have a tendency to go too far in. Drives me absolutely crazy. I can also see every single turn with my needle or with my pivoting. Over here is a zigzag. This one's a little bit better. It's a little bit more forgiving. And it covers up my raw edges so that I don't have any fraying going on like I do with my straight stitch. So it covers all that up, but it's also not nearly as forgiving as my blanket stitch. And so with my blanket stitch, I feel like I can make little errors and you just not see those as well as you can with the others. And so that is my favorite stitch. Please play with different stitches so that you figure out what you like the best. So when you're looking at your sewing machine, let's talk about how it's going to look on your sewing machine. This little symbol right here stands for your stitch width. This stands for your stitch length. So you go from little to biggest. Okay, that's your stitch length. When I use a zigzag stitch, this is my normal zigzag look, and I would definitely do some scrap to figure out what size you like the best. I always knock my stitch width down to 2.5 and my stitch length down to 0.8, and that gives me that nice tight look right here when I'm doing that zigzag. It's almost like a satin stitch. The smaller you go, the longer it's going to take, but the more satiny it looks. Over here, I have the blanket stitch. My blanket stitch looks like this normally when I'm looking for it on my machine. I knock it down so that my stitch width is 2.5 and my stitch length is 2.5. My machine automatically has the same length of 2.5 when it comes up on that, but I definitely knock my width down so that I have a smaller grab of my fabric. It helps me, if it's smaller, to get around corners easier. Another thing you want to observe is how that stitch goes when you're putting your needle goes down. So my blanket stitch, it goes forward, then it goes back, then it goes forward, over, and then it comes back. Forward, back, forward, over, over, forward, back, forward, over, over. And that's how my blanket stitch runs. When I am going around a corner, or I have a, where I have, let's say we're going around fabric right here, I want to make sure that as I'm doing this, my forward, back, forward, over, over, forward, back, forward, over, forward, back, over. When I get to this corner right here, I need to figure out how to pivot. And so I'm going to show you that when I get on the machine as to where I want to put my needle down into the fabric, turn my project so that it stays on the fabric and I don't have anything that's going to go outside of the fabric. The same thing needs to happen with, okay, here's another corner, when you're doing your zigzag. So you're zigzagging right along. You want to make sure when you get to this corner that you're pivoting, you're putting that needle down in that corner of the fabric on the right side. So that's why you need to practice, so that you can come back in here and do your, you'll have a little bit of bulk right there, but not much. And you can keep, and it'll just make it look so much neater. Okay, so that's a pivot where we're putting our needle into the fabric and then turning it, and I'll show you that on the fabric. First thing I do is use my hand wheel just to make sure everything's in the right place. So I'm a little bit further in than I want to be, so I'm going to bring that in. And now I'm going to know by using my hand wheel just where my machine is going to go. And then it's going to go over, and I want to make sure, because I'm like, I don't want to go off there. So I want to make sure I'm in the right place, and I keep it nice and slow. Okay, now that I have it going, I can stitch away. I like to keep the forward, back, forward on the edge of the fabric. Okay, so I know I'm going to get ready to go forward, and I'm cool with that. It's coming to the end. That's great. But I'm going to use my hand wheel now so that I can control exactly where my needle is going down, because when it goes over, I want to make sure it's not going into the black. So I'm going to go over and back right here. And now my needle is inside my fabric so that I can turn and not lose my place on my project. If I'm a little bit over, that's another reason to use that hand wheel, is so I can know exactly where that needle is going. And then I can and using that hand wheel again. I know that's going to go into the light pink, so I'm good with that. And now I want to make sure it's going to go forward. It is. We're good. And now I can keep going. There, I simply stitched a few stitches in the same spot so that I can move on to the next section, and then I can cut my threads later. So I'm going to simply move down and get started the same way. Make sure I'm in the right place using that hand wheel. And here we go. I switched over to my yellow because my pink's going to go around there, and I want to get my yellow done first. So I switched over to the yellow, and circles are always the trickiest. And that just means you have to take your time and allow yourself to be able to pivot quite a bit. So I've made sure I'm in the right spot, and I'm going to go ahead and tack in that space right there. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my needle down. I always want to make sure that where I'm stitching is going to be going in the direction that my needle is. I certainly don't want to start off like that or start off like that. I want to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. And then I'm taking it super slow. So if you can knock the speed down on your sewing machine, that is the best thing to do when you're going around curves, because then you can be sure to slow down really good. So I'm going to just turn it. I'm not turning it more than 45 degrees. I want to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. And I usually do like one and then reposition. And that's how you get them to look so neat, is that you just take your time, do a little bit at a time, and make sure you're pivoting frequently. Now that I'm at the last one, I'm going to go ahead and tack that in place, and I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to start in the very center of the little hearts and go around and end in the center of the hearts. For the edges of the vase, I just need to go on the outer sides. I don't need to do the top and the bottom. We're going to pivot just like we did for the convex curves as we are for the concave. I try not to pivot on the inside. I try to keep my pivots on the outside. And here she is, the pink version of our spring mini vase. So join us in a couple days and we're going to move on to the leafy section right here. And we will get these blocks done 1 5.5-inch square at a time. Anyone can applique.